represented the core leadership and facilitation team for the New York State Learning Technology Grant through Putnam Northern Westchester BOCES. We then found ourselves thrust into the middle of a pandemic, which forced teachers to pivot and move in many of the same ways, but not as deliberately as the grant had planned out and your plan had kind of laid out for teachers. So could you talk a little bit about how you all had to change your leadership styles, your communication, and your response individually and as a team in response to the pandemic? What began to change for all of you in terms of your leadership approach to making sure the grant would be seen through?
As somebody who was coordinating the grant efforts with other school districts and teachers across the region, we had adopted an approach early on that was really a bit of a hybrid or a mashup of face-to-face and online learning with our leaders too. So most of our meetings were done in person up until March 13th. Most of our communications were done through traditional means, and we were starting to incorporate digital communications and virtual sessions as a goal. Certainly on March 13th and after, that was no longer a choice. So we saw, like many districts, the acceleration of the adoption of virtual meetings, video conferencing, and some of the collaborative tools that were being used in the grant and that our teachers had learned about in a year and a half leading up to this. We started to have to use those out of necessity with all of our leaders. So we started to see the communication lines change, the way we facilitated our meetings, the way we updated one another on grant happenings and on roles and responsibilities changed really rapidly. And I think that paralleled the change that we saw in our classrooms, generally speaking, across the region.
We were much more mindful of the people rather than the curriculum. So we were thinking more about how do we bring them together? How do we help them to connect? How do we just make ourselves available for support? Because we knew they were all operating under very stressful conditions. And I think the approaches they could also use in their classroom to stay connected to kids and to keep connected to kids. And so it was that social and emotional learning piece that emerged for all of us with adults and kids as so vital, which is a goal of the grant, right? And became even more prevalent when we made that shift in March.
The most instrumental piece that I've taken away from the Learning Technology Grant is definitely my reevaluation of assessments, student assessments, as well as feedback. Thinking more about, in my practice, why I'm giving assessments, what the goal of those assessments are, and how I can support students through feedback, where assessments, instead of being an end goal, instead being part of the process for continued learning.
I think the most important thing that I got out of this PD series is that it's all kind of about the teacher and the relationships that they build with the students, no matter what the form of the classroom takes. Creating an online course or a blended learning course where you're not in front of the students every day doesn't mean that you can't develop a classroom community, doesn't mean you can't develop a relationship with your students.
All of a sudden in March, with the pandemic, everybody had to switch to this style of learning, and at that very point, I felt that I was already very comfortable. I felt like I was prepared. People are seeing the benefit of this blended learning, how we can put the learning into the hands of students and just be the facilitator.
When everything happened in the spring, when March 13th came and all of a sudden we were just home. We thought it was just going to be a weekend. We thought it was just going to be a week, and then it turned into multiple weeks. Then it turned into the entire rest of the school year. There were a lot of individuals, teachers and support staff who didn't really know how to pull it all together because they hadn't been faced with that challenge. And we were so blessed in this particular opportunity in that I already had all of my systems in place. I mean, I was doing blended learning with my students in the spring. They knew how to use Schoology. Even when I was in the classroom with them, we would be doing classroom discussions on Schoology. They were doing virtual group work prior to any virtual group work we were doing before. They already had those expectations and those understanding, and it made that particular course completely seamless.
Right in the beginning of the training, I always think back and say, I'm so glad that we spent that time going over social emotional learning and cultural responsive education, because that was, to me, that was the most important part of this experience. It helped me focus more on building the community, and building the community to me meant knowing my students better, giving them a chance to express themselves, to share, but also finding them, being able to find them where they are.
We were all struggling when we first started this grant 3 years ago. We said, how are you going to set up community in an online platform? It's impossible. So I've really been focusing on a lot of project-based learning and having groups interact with each other in small groups and breakout rooms. And I think giving them that relaxation time to be in a small group has been very successful. And then also kind of intermingling those groups to give each other feedback, that has been also successful in setting up this community. And I know we were all really hesitant about it, and now this is it. We were just thrown into it. So everything worked. So thank you. It really did work.
One of the things that Randy and Diane have taught us throughout this entire process is that we need to set boundaries when we're dealing with this virtual space, whether it's in Schoology and they have comments that they can add in, or commentary, or they're sharing learning experiences with one another. We have to make sure that students feel that they have the safety to say what it is that they want to say, but you must create that safe environment through boundaries and kind of rules and responsibilities right up front. And so I've tried to do that in a lot of my classes this year in creating these safe spaces, but showing students how do we create these safe spaces and modeling some of that behavior for the students. And I've had students really just flourish with that. Some of the comments that they'll write to one another, the feedback that they give to each other, it's not good job, it's this is great, but I could see it going in a different direction if you take it here, whereas they might not say that to another student in a different environment.
You're thinking about years to come. I think self-paced learning is one thing that I'm going to never let go of. I've seen, how much time I've wasted as a teacher designing an assignment and putting a deadline on it, and grading and emailing parents and stuff. And now with this self-paced learning, I can see how, students are empowered, and they learn to understand how they learn. It's definitely something that I am going to always having that component, trying to make sure that self-paced learning is the core and that students taking control of their learning.
I think that's the key. The big takeaway from all of this is we've now seen how much students want to learn. As a whole society, as an entire country, as an entire world, our students are begging to be challenged and excited with the material that they're learning. They want to do this. And for years and years, we've kind of held back saying, no, this is the way that it's always been done. And I'm nervous to let go of those reins. But we've done that. True, real blended learning, it has a place. And we're going to see over the next several years, its place is going to get larger and larger. It's a benefit to so many students who are just screaming out for that, please let me. please let me take control of my own learning because I can do it. But we're definitely going to see that this isn't going away. If anything, it's going to get larger and it's going to help our students more.